I would like to now invite all the panelists to come on with their cameras on. We've got Mike and Mufi who did the presentations, and Chris who just presented, and Cliff, obviously, please stay on, and Oleg. This is quite a panel, a gathering of experts. Again, thank you all for being here and showing some of the demonstrations. Cliff, I want to stick with you for a second. And I think that a lot of people are asking, okay, you're talking about the standard of 15.11.8, and Electrify America is using that as a communication protocol and going to be offering plug and charge for this good EV charging user experience. If you weren't using 15.11.8, what would you be doing? What would be the communication protocol that you would be implementing? How would you be communicating between the car and the charging station?
Then I would still fight with Oleg what's the right communication path for that. I don't have an easy answer for that because I'm part of the industry for a while, and the current ISO 15.11.8 implementation was released or standard was released in 2014. Before that, there was at least 2 to 4 years of an industry collaboration working on what is the right protocol, how can we enable advanced charging communication on top of existing technology. This is what the industry aligned on. So therefore, for me, there's right now no alternative. If you want to go backwards and say, okay, we don't want to do billing, we just want to plug in and charge like an L2 charger without authentication, then we probably could come up with some alternative means. But if you want to really have the customer experience with plugging in, getting built in the background, having the authentication, having also the ability for energy services, all of that. Right now, there's only ISO 15.11.8 available in the market. This is also why we on the EA side, a lot of the vehicle manufacturers are implementing that right now, because we need to align on one communication, because if the chargers do something different than the vehicle manufacturers, then we will never have a cohesive customer experience.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think that that's kind of the underlying thing, is that it's not that, if there is an alternative, I suppose people would look at this, but it is the helping drive the EV adoption and making things that are seeable in the near future and achievable is something that is very important. So I thank you for that, because I know that I've been asked that several times before, and you're in the forefront. You're the ones that are actually doing this right now, and I know a handful of other ones we've mentioned before, legacy car companies that Ford has taken a big step. The auto OEMs need to be implementing this, and they came out announcing that last year, which is fantastic. A question came in.
Bart, before we go to the next question, I would like to add something to what Cliff said, because I think it's very important. I come from telecom industry, and in telecom industry, when we talked about interoperability and new protocols, we always talked about 7 years of evolutionary revolution. If you go back at the beginning of the mobile industry and you look at how many years it took for our phone to become an easy to interrupt with device, right? Before we actually were able to make phone calls everywhere. It took quite a few years. And that's why it's important to focus on what Cliff said earlier. The standard was adopted in 2014 or 13, I don't remember exactly the year. But it takes time for interoperability to flourish, because it's not always as easy as people think. I remember a discussion in one of the meetings moderated by CPUC of VGI working group, when somebody said, well, we should decide on the protocol and move forward, and tomorrow the industry will adopt it. It doesn't happen like that. It takes years. If you look at the first event of interoperability that was hosted back at Argonne National Laboratory in Chicago, it was, Cliff, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was 7 years ago. And that was the first time we started talking about how to interoperate, how to bring multiple stakeholders to the table, how to actually get the bugs out interpretations of the protocols that may be different from different people, from different vendors. It takes time. And that is why it's very important to understand that what we see today as a breaking out adoption, it's not because somebody decided to invent the protocol yesterday. It's a crowning moment of a very long and very strenuous path where multiple stakeholders bring their heads and their expertise and their relentless ability to test and test and test together to create this very easy interoperable experience of a smartphone.
Yeah. So I have, thank you very much for that, Oleg. And because we have a good turnout and some very good questions, I of course always have some questions that are ready. We've got some really interesting questions that have come in, and I always like to address the questions from the attendants. And the next one came in for Mufi. You had mentioned at the end, talking about protocols being used, you said that you are using auto charge. The question, why, you're using auto charge, so why not stick with that? Why are you moving to ISO 15118? What is what was that critical decision behind you making this change?
Yeah, it's a great question, by the way. And so if you see I'll just build off of what Cliff and Oleg just said. If you see the use case of a fleet, right? Say a driver drives in, and in a use case of a fleet, the driver has no relation to the vehicle because they are not owning the vehicle or anything of that sort, right? And so we're seeing a whole spectrum of deployments where the worst case scenario is that the fleet manager has told us to turn off authentication on the charging station because it's such a burden on the driver, right? So that is the worst case scenario is, okay, just open it up and we'll assume that it's a closed fleet depot, but that's not scalable. So the next step is auto charge, where really we have vehicle IDs that are in our system and we just match that. And I think at this scale it's okay, or sort of just below good enough because it works, but it's not scalable for many other reasons. One being, just managing a large scale of authentication, de-authentication of vehicles as they go in and out. And auto charge is fine when you have one or two vehicles or small vehicle fleet, and they're all operating in the same sort of contract. But beyond that, it'll not scale very quickly. So we see auto charge as being a step forward in that direction. The other key piece that we see, especially in fleet operations, where right now we are just talking about pilots, but when they move to mission critical fleet operations, where the vehicles have to be charged, they have to leave at the right time, the notion of security can become significant. And we all take security for granted, but you can imagine that just this vehicle authentication piece from the vehicle to the cloud back into the utility can become a huge point of failure across everything, right? And so there has to be a much more secure form of authentication that has to be deployed when these fleets scale. Otherwise, this will not happen. I mean, this could be one of the big things that will just stop every deployment, which is just simply security. And I think that's really one of the key underpinnings of 15118 that will help it scale across across the fleets.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you for that. It's interesting because, as I said earlier on in the question to Cliff, is what are the other options? And not that auto charge is a robust protocol, but it does come down, I think, to the security aspects and the endurance and the multiple use cases that such a standard implementing that once, and the security aspects of not only plug and charge but smart charging bi-directional, which all of a sudden liberate different groups like fleets to be able to utilize the mobile battery and as a mobile energy source. So thank you for that. A question came in that it was regarding what do you see for Chris? What do you see as the challenges of not having interoperable protocols around EV charging?
It raises a couple of issues. So one of them is you lose this customer convenience, right? If you don't, 15118 is a perfect example where you can do this plug and charge. So if you don't have that interoperability, you can't do that, or you're stuck and you have to say, well, I have to find network ABC and go out of my way to do that, where, and you've ended up being less more inconvenience than you started out with. Another one that is this vendor lock-in that I mentioned, where you have a closed proprietary protocol between the EVSE and the cloud. And I'm a site owner, I buy a charger, I buy a service, and then, a year later, I want to change a service, or 3 years later, I want to add 10 more chargers. Well, I'm stuck with that vendor. If that vendor decides to raise their prices, or if their service quality goes down, and that can turn into a stranded asset. In fact, if you look at the Pennsylvania Turnpike, there are hundreds of chargers that are installed there that are just, well, people call them paperweights now, right? Because you can't use them because the company went out of business and nobody can connect to them and operate with them. So those are some examples.
Great. A question that is kind of dealing with the user. Actually, no, hold on. There's one specific one for Mike that is talking about on the slide that you showed. Is the sniffer you shared as one of your products and testing and validation equipment? Is the sniffer you shared as one of your products, testing and validation equipment, or an active logger that is intended to stay with the vehicle at all times? This is more of a kind of a testing to help in the interoperable and get the bugs all worked out, so that again, interoperability and being able to go from one charging station, one car, different make, different model, to different charging stations is able to be achieved, correct?
Exactly. Actually, it can be both. So we can, the analyzer can be used either, as think of it like an oscilloscope. When if you're doing any hardware debug, you need some instrumentation. You need to see what's happening, because, like any problem, in order to solve a problem, you need to see it. Usually once you see it, then the solution is always very, very simple. It's the point where the time it takes you to get to the point where you understand what exactly happened. And, for the PLC communication, there's some additional, maybe some burden there, which is the reliability, which kind of sounds like a silly thing to say, but it's, it is a very reliable communication mechanism, which has a lot of retransmission. So basically either it works or it doesn't. And marginal cases are very difficult to find, to understand when communication is actually marginal, because you don't really understand it's marginal until it doesn't work. And you only find that it doesn't work is, in the field, and, in the most inconvenient time. So it lets you basically look at this information in the lab setting, and also, in the vehicle, to do as connected to data loggers and understand what happened after the fact.
Yeah.
Great one, and I think that. Please go ahead.
Yeah, let me add on to that, because I think our lab wouldn't work without the sniffer. So especially to get prepared for 15.11.8 and test between the vehicle and the charger, really align from all of the messages which are going out from the vehicle to the charger and the responses. I think without the sniffer, we could barely do it. You either need a lot of instrumentation on the vehicle or on the charger side to really make it visible. And I see that with different OEMs coming in. Some of the traditional ones have done a lot of work around that, but the newer ones still need some help, and you really can explain them nicely. This is what you should receive, and this is what you receive, and work with them step by step through the protocol and how the protocol needs to be implemented.
Well, thank you very much, Cliff.
Yes.
I owe you a beer.
Well, and also,
You owe me a
I think
sniffer.
this is an example. It is an we use the word ecosystem in many different ways. Object has developed an ecosystem for a part of enabling ISO 15118, but I think that it really is an ecosystem of cooperation between organizations, and that is CharIN, the organizer of this webinar, is driven and supported by almost 200 international companies from all different type of sectors. And so I think it's the collaboration and the being able to have testables, which CharIN supports, to be able to bring hardware manufacturers and hardware, software, and auto OEMs together, again, where we would have been last week at Lucid, to help drive this forward. And And on that, I want to, Cliff, just stay with you. There's a question that I think is appropriate for you. This was addressed to any panelist, so please jump in. Question is, do you think a shift from hardware and devices like an RFID card or credit card to software like 15.11.8 implementation will result in cheaper EV chargers and therefore more of them on the roads in North America? Cliff, maybe you want to comment on that, and Chris as well, since you're a little bit on the hardware side. And then Mufi, maybe your take on that from implementation on a fleet perspective.
I think the discussion is how far you want to go. Right now, you have multiple payment methods on the charger. You either use an RFID card, you use a credit card, you use an app with NFC on the RFID card reader, or you use plug and charge with 15.11.8. If you would get rid of the RFID reader and the credit card reader and maybe even on the screen, because for plug and charge you would not really need the screen, then certainly you can take out some cost. But in order to enable all of the customers to use the different means of payment and other indication, I think there will be no big change just because we are implementing 15.11.8. And maybe Chris from your side.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Cliff, on that. I wouldn't see a big change. I think it will definitely help promote EV adoption, especially as it accelerates and, more OEMs adopt it and more, it improves the customer experience, right? So it's another thing in favor of EV adoption. Building it into the EVSE itself shouldn't add any cost. I mean, you want to start there. And then again, as it becomes more standardized, you'll see more competition and you'll see costs driven down over time in the market. I mean, we're already seeing that, but it will contribute to that going forward.
Yeah, and I'll just add a couple more thoughts. So, and I'll just build off of what Chris said. So, I mean, those of us who've been around technology long enough have seen this story play out in many other parallel areas. And the one example that comes to mind is Ethernet. And so back in the 80s and 90s, when Ethernet was very early, there was a lot of debate about, is Ethernet the most efficient and the most scalable networking protocol, right? And folks who probably, I'm going to age myself, but it was at that time there was a competing protocol called Token Ring from IBM, right? And there was a lot of debate about which one is better than the other. But the point here is, if it's good enough and it can scale really well, then it can open up the industry to a lot more things. And Ethernet took off because it was an open standard. It was adopted by everybody across the board: computer manufacturers, networking card manufacturers, routers, switches, hubs, all of that stuff, right? And once everybody agreed on Ethernet, it opened the market up to everybody. And so ultimately, this leads to a consumer benefit where you have just more choices of hardware and software. It grows the market, reduces the friction from a consumer side as well. So there's more choices, and so it's sort of a self-fulfilling thing. Once you get past that standards battle, then it just the rising tide basically lifts all boats. And I think we are all to your point, Bart, we are at the very early stage of this industry, and what we need right now is not the perfect protocol, but something that can actually deliver, and we can all align and quickly scale. Now, just to go back to fleets, it's really interesting because in our case, we have more of a sandbox environment in the sense that when we operate with a fleet, they have vehicles from one or two manufacturers. So our problem relative to, say, somebody like Cliff is a lot less complex because we are dealing with a known set of vehicles. For example, buses from BYD, Proterra, New Flyer in the transit space. And as these guys adopt, say 15.11.8, then it takes off very quickly because then you're buying, these four manufacturers, they all support it, and the scaling happens very quickly, as opposed to on the consumer side where you have a much broader sort of variety of vehicles. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you very much for everybody chiming in on that. And I think that is leads into a question that came through about what is the implementation, what is actually available out there. Chris, you maybe from hardware, and Mike, you presented something in the demo. Cliff, you obviously are implementing. Maybe you can comment on hardware, but Mike, maybe because you showed your demo, where is this in reality? You had the the video which you showed. Can you give us an update or explain a little bit more as to kind of the implementation or the status of that?
Sure. So everything is fully implemented. So we have, from our side, we have modules. We do more of the brains, let's say, of the charger, manage the communication, do all the. Our job, we feel, is to take the complexity out of the development of the charging system development and make the protocols easy to use and allow our customers who build chargers and vehicles to do what they do best, to build their differentiated features and not have to worry about all of this, all of this complexity. I mean, when we looked at the video, there was a lot of there's a lot that goes on, in a plug and charge session, and anyone who's been through one of the testables can, tell you all of the back and forths and the questions, especially entering plug and charge with all of the encryption algorithms and the signature validations, and all of this is really important to make the system interoperable and secure. But it's difficult, from an implementation point of view. When you build, like if you look now, like web development, if you have some application which is running and secure, it uses subsystems that are already built. TLS is already built. You already have all of this the roots installed in your PC from various sources. You already have all this infrastructure in place, and you just build on top of it. You don't need to go from the ground up, and that's really what we enable. And having this implemented and tested with many vehicles is really where the proof is. Getting to these testables and doing this testing, as Cliff was saying before, testing is really, validation is absolutely key in making sure that all of this is working.
And so, Cliff, with all of your testing, do you have a go live date? When will somebody be able to use plug and charge in the Electrify America network?
Now you put me on the spot again. As I said, in summer we want to have the first sites. So in summer we want to be done. So we have another 2 to 2.5 months to finish the software, get ready for production, and then it's going to take us some time to go to all of the charging sites and then get it out there. I think in general, when we started that, probably a year ago, 1.5 years ago, the actual implementation also with the car manufacturer, there was barely anything there. By now, with the V2G routes for North America, which have been set up, all of the certificate pools, as we had seen in the video before, are set up. The charger manufacturers are nearly done with the implementation. All of them, as far as I can see, are done with the good cases. We still have to work through some exception cases. So I think, so step by step, everything is coming together. So therefore, in a summer time frame, there is a kind of a template implementation, I think, from our side in the US with Electrify America, but also with Ionity in Europe. And then if you have this accomplished, then it's more or less an off-the-shelf product which others can roll out as well. We had seen that with the 350 kilowatt charging, where we put a lot of effort in creating these chargers, and now everyone can buy these chargers. And then companies like Siemens and others, you can work with them and get a charger and then get it installed and build the nice depots as we had seen from Chris before. So I think we are at the same stage with plug-in charge. We are nearly ready for rollout, and then you can buy it kind of off the shelf from the different vendors.
Great. I think that the message there is that it's very close. It's no longer the theoretic. It's no longer in a lab. It is really advanced, as you said. I think that each set of 6 months, there's huge advancements. And so again, it goes back to that ecosystem. It comes down to having a better understanding, knowledge of that, but also knowing that when the cars are out there, additional charging stations. Chris, maybe you want to comment on that as an organization that is actually Siemens very early on was one of the first companies to look at and support plug and charge. To maybe expand on where you're seeing this. I know that mandating is something where you're not in favor of, but clearly the idea of interoperability is something that you are supportive of.
Yeah, we say open standards are in our DNA. So we're very market driven. So in terms of our implementation, we are implementing it now. We're not shipping any chargers today with it built in. And I can't give you the specific date, but it's soon. It's in the months, not the years time frame. In particular, what we're seeing, we're seeing this great effort in the U.S., but in Europe, it's even further ahead. So we're seeing most of the requests for proposals from Europe coming in are asking for this functionality. I mentioned the California Energy Commission earlier, which would be their program for funding that would start next year. As well. So we've got these nice market forces coming together and the automakers as well. So we love the standard and are looking forward to including it. And like I said, to start shipping it not too long from now.
Because it's, I remember I was out a little bit, but I could hear the poll indicated that we have quite a technical group here. A question came in as to how close is ISO 15118 to Ethernet, and I think Oleg, you're probably the best one to briefly describe that. Just to clarify, and I love this. People asking questions. This is what these webinars are for, is to help ask so that you can get your questions answered and understand better as to what the standard does or doesn't do and how it compares to other processes in the whole EV charging infrastructure. Oleg?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to be honest with you, sometimes I can see this question as being slightly misplaced, because when we talk about ISO 15118, we need to understand where it belongs to in the ISO model, of layers. Many people have seen those big layers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So ISO 15118 actually spans across all 7 layers, because part of it, such as slack, signal level attenuation control, which identifies which charger connected to what, exists at physical layer 1. But most of the messaging actually belongs to upper layers from 5th to 7th. Ethernet is about layer 2.5. And by the way, if you look at home plug power line communications that is used as a physical media, it uses Ethernet frames, Ethernet packets to communicate over the power line. So Ethernet is actually part of what 15118 is today. It's part of its DNA. I don't know if I dug too deep into the technical details, but that's what it is.
I think that's a perfect level to be able to look at that. Cliff, a question came in regarding an alternative different kind of charging connector. Question is, do you see customers charging with CHAdeMO or just with legacy? I suppose that they're meaning with some kind of J1772 or with the CCS combo.
Yeah, you see all of it. So right now, the network is supporting AC charging with J1772, and as well as CHAdeMO and CCS. Certainly, most of the charging vehicles we see are the CCS cars, just because of the amount of vehicles. On the CHAdeMO side, you have the Nissan Leafs and some they're like the Outlander from Mitsubishi, but at smaller volumes. All of these vehicles are supporting J1772, so you also see them on the AC charging side. But we clearly see a strong, or the most of the volume on the CCS side, or maybe as well the CHAdeMO Tesla adapters, where the Model 3s and the Model S is using the CHAdeMO CCS adapter.
Yeah, and so clearly a majority, I guess, are using kind of the CCS charging connector. Yeah. Mufi,
And also on the CCS, so the big difference, what you also see is not only most of the latest cars are supporting CCS, but also all of the cars which support higher power charging. So the CharIN with either with the Tesla adapter or on the CharIN are usually on the 50 kilowatt side, maybe going up to 100 kilowatts in certain instances. But the 150 and 270, 350 kilowatts, you see only on the CCS side.
Right, and I suppose that the clearly high power charging is going to be more attractive because one of the barriers to entry is the time that it takes to charge a vehicle. People want, they want the convenience, but they also want the time. So that's probably a key reason why you're upping the charging power to be able to lower that time that somebody's sitting in a charger.
Right, because for EV adoption, you want to come as close as possible to fueling a vehicle. Like at the gas station, people are used to getting their 300 miles in 5 minutes, 4-5 minutes, and they're expecting something similar on the charger in order to have it as a comparable vehicle. And now it's coming down on 200 to 300 miles in 15 to 20 minutes with a few of the cars, but hopefully more coming soon. That really brings the vehicles, the EV vehicles, closer from a fueling experience to what customers are expected from a gasoline vehicle.
Yeah. Well, I think that as the range expands a bit and charging the times and power increases, that's clearly going to be, I think, a big help in getting the EV adoption. Of course, and then just the charging stations all around. But considering that charging a majority of the time happens at home, people still want to make sure that if they choose the electric vehicle as either a primary or secondary vehicle, that they know that if they go on a road trip that they won't, that they'll be able to charge as they gradually get from A to B. So I know that that the charging speed is very important. Going into to Mufi, there was a question that came in. You had spoke about large scale fleets. How do you plan on utilizing 15.11.8 when it applies to large scale fleets? Because you had mentioned before that some of the smaller fleets are growing up, but you said that you started to indicate that how this was going to be an important element to help you manage and provide better services to your clients when operating fleets by including 15.11.8 as a protocol between the fleet vehicle and the charging station that you manage.
Yeah, so in terms of a fleet operator, if you can think about it as they scale, they are dealing with multiple levels of complexity. So they're dealing with fleet operations. So how the fleet moves on a daily basis, schedules, routes, drivers, things like that. They're also dealing with the utility rates as they vary through the day, through the night, through the seasons, right? And so for us, this becomes a bigger platform for how do you move data around securely, and how do you change the relationship of the vehicle to the energy infrastructure and the fleet operations. And so if you sort of go back, a lot of the elements of 15.11.8 spill into energy and grid authentication. Also, some of those same protocols can be or APIs can be used to attach into fleet operation systems. Say, for example, you're using Trapeze for fleet management, dispatch management. We can use a lot of the secure APIs to gather all the data together. And one of the key problems that we see, especially at scale, is when you have, say, a fleet of 1,500 vehicles that's operating on a daily basis, and you want to change certain behaviors of the fleet in terms of authenticating, deauthenticating vehicles, or just changing the contract between vehicles, it can become incredibly cumbersome if you're not managing at the fleet level. So again, I'm touching at a super high level, but for us, it's the core sort of hinges around two things. One is a secure connection across all of these different data sources, and two, managing groups of vehicles in a more scalable manner. So those are the two underpinnings that we see, which will be very core to us as we scale the fleet deployments.
So this is, I think the fleet is an incredibly powerful and interesting sector that you're providing solutions to. Just because, as I mentioned before, as you get into smart charging and bi-directional, it all of a sudden enables a fleet company to expand into almost a separate business from what their core business might be of moving people from A to B or produce from A to B to all of a sudden being a micro energy provider of receiving renewable energy, which obviously has to be either stored or used at the time that it's generated, and store that and then be able to put that back either in a micro local grid or put that back into the wider grid. And and this just goes back into, I think, the value and the importance of a protocol like 15.11.8, where that secure communication is established. Because if you look at bidirectional and giving power from the vehicle back into the grid wants to make sure that that is a trusted instruction in terms of how much electricity, how much energy is going to be going back into the grid, because otherwise the grid could go out of balance. And if you're talking about fleets of 100 or 1,000 vehicles that might be able to provide electricity, that's where I think that the importance of a secure communication is extremely important. And there's a question looking at interesting, even though I think I heard that there weren't many sales and marketing people on there. This is a bit more sales oriented question. Is that, I think that plug and charge technology has been proven and certainly can be applicable and scalable, but the business activity for plug and charge has been limited mostly to OEMs and mobility operators who want to give their customers a better experience. Any business prognostication for 2020 or 2021 for the plug and charge market from our expert panel? I think it's a very fair question, because we talk a lot about technology, but it doesn't work if there's no kind of real business case behind it. So maybe Cliff, Oleg, I know that you look at this from also a business point of view. If you guys could comment on that, that would be great.
Cliff, would you like to start?
I'm still trying to talk my thoughts. Do you want to start?
Sure, why not? Well, I'll give you a very simple example about it. If you look at what pushes market forward, what creates demand for products, it's competition. If I can enable my customer to use a better product with better features, it already simplifies my business, it creates additional value. And that pushes my competitors to jump into the same. So let's take one simple example. Let's talk about fleets. Mufi talked about fleets quite a lot. What is the most difficult factor to deal with today? The most difficult factor always is human factor, right? So if we're talking about asset management, and we're talking about, as an example, a driver plugging his vehicle when he or she is back to the depot, and then being required to enter some data to say, okay, I'm charging from charger XYZ number, and I would like to punch my card and so forth. How many errors will we get while doing so? How many errors will we get if we require a driver to enter state of charge, as an example, of the vehicle that just parked in the depot? You will get magnitude of errors, because we're humans, and what's natural to us, it's to shortcut. We always would like to find a path of least resistance, right? So if we're required to do certain things, some of us will do it, some of us will say, I'll just pick up 90% or 80% as a number, and I'll be happy with it. So what plug and charge will do in this case is completely eliminate human error out of this process, because the vehicle itself identifies with the charger. The vehicle can provide a host of information, not just state of charge, but, as an example, some historical data, some diagnostic data that can be extracted and uploaded at the same time. So all of a sudden, you just improved total cost of operation by eliminating errors in this process. Let's take another opportunity. I'm an employee, I come to work. Well, of course, I can find my RFID card. Of course, I can punch my numbers. Of course, I can do something. But what if my employer says, okay, look, if you're a member of this network, we just made a deal with your network, and you and I, you employer and me employer, we can share savings from demand response applications. And your vehicle all of a sudden can generate $400, $500 a month for you as a consumer. Well, that's fantastic. That's great. And you know what? If it is a no-brainer, if it is all done for me, guess what? The first companies that will introduce it will push everybody else to jump on the same, because all of a sudden now we're changing the total cost of opportunity, total cost of product to me as a consumer. So that's very powerful. And 15.11.8, with all of the mechanisms, including plug-in charge built into it, creates a platform to deliver that additional value, as Mike discussed in his multiple petals of stakeholders, to all of us, not just consumer, not just operator, not just the grid, to everybody who is in this value chain.
I'll just add a couple more thoughts to build off of what Oleg just said, and just to give you some very crisp customer examples. We've been in a few RFPs very recently in the past few months, where customers are specifically asking, "What is your plan for 15.11.8?" Right? And so they're asking. So that tells us that there is a level of education in customers, especially those who are operating big complex fleet, to understand how all of these pieces are going to fit together, and what technologies we as a vendor are building to support them. So and that's true with other things like OCPP. OCPP is a great example. Most of the RFPs that we are in, OCPP is a required protocol that we need to support. There's no, like, either you support or you don't, right? And in some cases, it basically for a vendor like us, it could be disqualification if you don't support that. We see that happening with 15.11.8 as well, as more customers gain traction. And then just to add another example, Bart, going back to your example about B2G, and so if you followed some big announcements in the fleet side, like one good example is Dominion Energy talking about 1,000 electric school buses being rolled out in the next 5 years or so. Now there, it's a much bigger play about a utility rolling out, utility getting into the school bus business. Or fleet business, because they see it as an extension of the grid. And anything that attaches to the grid will have to be super secure. There's no question about it, because anything that becomes a part of the grid becomes a point of failure or an attack point from a security standpoint, right? So we see protocols like these become mandatory across these vehicles anyways. So the moment you do V2G across a vehicle, that becomes an attack point into the entire system, and so all of this will have to be secure. There's no, so to go back to your answering a question, given the existing circumstances, I don't think anybody can put a timeline in the ground of when this will take off. But it's not the question of if, it's a question of when now. So it might be a year out before it takes off, maybe more. We don't really know given the circumstances, but it will take off. There's no way around it.
Two more points from my side. So as we see the OEMs right now to implementing either 15.11.8 with plug and charge to improve the customer experience, I think we are going to see next the utilities engaging there. I think the utilities are looking at it. The protocol is built that way that you can either do scheduled charging, something like that, to help the grid, and just charge when there's green energy available or where there's low demand on the grid. So I think the utilities are going to utilize plug and charge next, or either 15.11.8 next. And then one step further down the road, most likely also autonomous charging, because if there is no customer there to present authentication, then you need something where the vehicle can authenticate itself while charging when it's at the station. You need a protocol which enables that in order to provide that feature.
Yeah, and that it just leads to what how it can evolve from here. I mean, there's different, as Mufi was talking about with the fleets, but also other business opportunities that from the consumer side, how they might benefit from it. And it doesn't have to be a large group, but there's an individual that might be able to benefit from such a standard. We spoke yesterday. Actually, we had a presentation to some of the California policymakers, and California has been ravaged by forest fires. And just imagine the ability to utilize your private vehicle as a source of energy back into your home to be able to power your refrigerator and just simple basic various things around the house for you to be able to survive those few days without to go vacate your home. So I mean, there's the use cases can be varied. They may not always be strictly business oriented, but I think it's the ability to see how it can be applied in many different ways for benefits to all those. Mike laid them out very well in your slide, some of the benefits of this. And so I think that it's just, as we expand on this, it is going to be something that is, we just start to peel back the onion a little bit more to see the real power of what such a standard like this and usability across many different applications. Chris, I wanted to ask you, I saw that you had posted an article on LinkedIn last week about V2V, so vehicle to vehicle charging, kind of a cool technology, and how that could help address the fear of having no one be able to charge in place. Like, in terms of technology and maybe bringing this into a little bit bigger picture as to the future, like, what do you see as the potential for enablers of EV adoption?
Well, that's an interesting one. It seems like it should be pretty simple, V to V. We just have a cable and plug one into the other, but obviously it doesn't work that way. You've got to have the protocols built into the chargers and the inverters to be able to actually exchange the power. So you could actually cause a lot of trouble if you just tried to put a cable between two vehicles without having that set up in the first place. So in terms of enablers, it's really about, making that customer experience simple. So they know that these things are out there. They know if they're on the road and they find chargers that they can use them. There's some apps out there that will tell you what chargers are available. In fact, Google Maps will tell you. Sometimes they'll tell you whose charger it is, which charging network. Others they won't. But it's only a partial solution because it doesn't tell you whether it's actually available to use to charge. Sometimes it doesn't tell you who the charger is. So, I mean, imagine a Google Maps which has the roads on it, but you don't know if the roads are going to be open, when you follow the instructions. So that's kind of the stage we're at with these charging networks. And then you have little solutions coming from different players that are starting to come together. But it does become more universal level. Definitely helps move the market forward. So, customer understanding, customer experience, simplicity, open standards and interoperability, where people have that comfort. As Cliff was saying, it's like, I know I'll find a gas station, I'll be able to use it, I'll be able to pay for my gas. So that's what it comes down to.
Very good. Well, I think it would be an interesting way. Again, these are all tools and technologies that will be developed to ease in and probably more enticing for people to choose an electric vehicle as their next or second vehicle. We have one last question. This is very much directed to probably to me, talking about the interoperability and the part of the ecosystem aspect of the interoperability between root CAs. They said there's interoperability between root CAs in Europe. Do you think that there will be an issue in North America, or Hubject can be a sole root CA? Hubject has set up a V2G root CA in accordance to the standard and accompanying documentation. But we're trying to be an enabler, working closely with Electrify America and other players in the market to facilitate the implementation of ISO 15118. As I've mentioned before, it's an ecosystem of collaboration between companies, and there's nothing that says that anybody is going to be sole anything, but we are happy to be an early adopter and facilitator in setting up the systems for both the secure PKI and also the ecosystem to enable the secure exchange of the digital certificates that are required for a true end-to-end plug-and charge experience, and also to enable that secure charging connection between the EV and the charging station. So, we've got, I think, gone through a lot of the questions. I open it up if there's any last comments that the panelists have. I welcome that, and then also Oleg to kind of continue on. But if there's any last comments that any of the panelists would like to contribute, please share that now. We have a good group of participants that have stayed on, and I value, and I'm sure they do, your insights. So any last comments?
I'll throw something out. So I work a lot with policymakers, right? And you bring up standards and their eyes glaze over, and we in this group know how important these things are and the timing as well. And usually the reaction is, well, let's worry about, funding for the make-ready equipment, and we'll worry about the standards later. And yeah, it's a good thing. But as we know, as Oleg was saying, it's a long process to get standards implemented once you've decided you're going to implement them. So, anything we can do in terms of educating that community and the rest of the community about the need to move quickly on standards, even though it's an evolution, it's a long process, but we need to decide now that we're going that direction. And there are good examples of that. I mentioned some in Europe, where, everybody can use every public charger because they have a requirement for the connector standard, which you don't have here. So that's just the one point I wanted to make there.
Great. Again, to all the panelists, thank you very, very much, Mufi, for the presentation.
Sorry.
Mike. Oh, yes, Mike.
Yeah, just one comment just to address real quick. One of the questions that was asked earlier was about, what the driver is, what the market need is. And I think, like any solution, you need to have a problem, right, to have a solution. And we can love 15.11.8, we can love any standard. We can, when it's a want, it's one thing, but when it's a need, it's another thing. If we talk about energy management and we have, millions of EVs that will be on the roads, and everyone's going to come home at a certain, at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, plug the vehicles in, turn them on and charge. Management is needed. This energy scheduling is needed. It's not going to be, you're not solving a problem of wanting something. You're solving a problem of there's going to be a catastrophic failure if these systems don't work together and we don't do these things and we don't have this standard and we don't have these systems working and talking to each other. So that's the real, in my vision, that's the real need as we move forward.
Yep, I agree. And looking, need is one thing, but want is something. But we do need to have something that is reliable and something that again, the interoperability enables that cost and convenience. Looking at it from a business point of view, from let's say hardware manufacturers, is something to be consistent, that was reliable, and that then allows for scalability, and that's really what is going to help us achieve a larger infrastructure implementation. So with that, I want to thank you, the panelists, very much. I want to pass this over to Oleg because we have up next an interesting presentation on an additional use case of 15.11a, the automated connected device. Panelists, thank you very much. Oleg, I'm going to pass it over to you and look forward to this next presentation.
So I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in one comment. Thank you to Bart and CharIN. I think it's forums like these that help move standards forward, because all the close to 100 people that are on the call, I think this is and if each of us goes out and spreads the word, it helps us move this forward. So again, thank you all. Everybody's on the call here.
Well, thank you, Bart. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Mufi, for your comment. I fully agree with you. Ecosystem is not something that exists in virtual world. It's something that all of us have to move forward. And collaboration among those lines, collaboration of all of us, what will make it happen, because we can invent and co-invent things. And co-invention is a very powerful thing. Many companies, many stakeholders working together can move the mountains, literally. So thank you again, panelists. And with that, actually, it's a great bridge to jump to the next subject, which is what will we do with 15.11.8 in the future? What other use cases will be enabled? And automatic charging, essentially charging that is enabled by robotic platforms, is something that it marries with 15.11.8 wonderfully. It's autonomous driving. It's the vision of us not getting out of the car and not touching anything. So with that, I would like to ask the video to be shown.
Hi, this is Patrick from Connect My Evie. It's my pleasure speaking to you today at the CharIN virtual conference. Okay, you've seen the demos and heard the panelists speak about the latest in plug and charge. Now our company is going to show you what happens even before the charging connector is plugged in, and how we can completely take the Evie owner out of the charging sequence. For that, we have to solicit robotics and automation. Let's start off by showing you a video of Connect My Evie's advanced charging device operating in a real-time environment. This is a short clip from an exploratory project on hands-free charging that we did with the Ford Motor Company. The purpose of the video is to show how safe and effortless it would be for consumers to charge their cars using our device. Simply park the car and let Connect My Evie's robot do the rest. The unit you see on the ground is a fully operational automatic robotic charger. Ford's CEIC software detects the charger, checks that the car needs charging, and signals for Connect My Evie's charger to charge. The green light flashing from the car side unit guides the robot arm to connect. Here, the robot is shown to be rising to meet the car side unit. It then makes contact, allowing for charging to begin. This second video will give you more insight into the workings of the robotics. The segment is taken in our lab, where you can see in more detail how Connect My Evie's automatic charging actually occurs. We will do this demonstration slower, so you will be able to see it while I have more time to explain. There is the driver taking the key out of the simulated car. The car unit sends a broadcast. Is there a Connect My Evie robot listening and ready to offer me a charge? The car unit asks the robot to connect. The ground unit opens and then maneuvers to align to the car unit on the parked car. This allows the car to be parked within the normal accuracy expected in a parking spot. The robot then establishes a connection and confirms the connection quality. The very motion of making the contact cleans the surfaces to ensure the very high connection quality. When the driver returns and inserts the key, the arm retracts and the robot returns to its initial position. Oh, by the way, the robot would also retract automatically in the middle of the night when the charge completes, presenting a fully charged Evie the next morning, ready to be driven away. When parking at a public charging location, equipped with Connect My Evie's robotic unit, please note that our hands-free device requires no touching of cables or charging connectors. This is an important feature in the post-COVID-19 world, to avoid any infections from handling shared equipment in public places. The system is designed to work with a range of ground clearances and parking tolerances. The smart robot compensates for misalignment between the car unit and the ground unit, guaranteeing a connection every time. This feature offers a key benefit of a reliable, hands-free connection for all EV users. What you have seen in detail is an example of what the industry refers to as Automatic Connection Device Underside, or ACDU configuration. However, in some situations, an alternative robot configuration may be preferred, where the robot approaches the side entry port. ConnectMyEV also offers a side entry connection ACDS charging robot that you will see in this upcoming video. After this video, I would like to take the opportunity to answer some frequently asked questions. Here are some frequently answered questions. Do I need to park precisely? No. The system will accommodate the vehicle within a 2-foot circle of the charger. Will the system emit hazardous electromagnetic radiation? No. Unlike wireless systems, this system is a direct, efficient, conductive connection to your vehicle. How is a safe and efficient connection ensured? Every time the charger connects, a contact resistance check is done. This is to ensure that the contacts that are covered when not in use have wiped away contaminants and are in good electrical contact. While charging, the temperature of the contacts is monitored to continue verification of the quality contact. What happens if the car were to shift due to unintended motion, like sitting in a car or putting groceries in the trunk? The system is mechanically compliant and will move with the vehicle. If there is too much motion, the system will safely electrically and mechanically disconnect. If more charge is desired, it will attempt to reconnect. Can this system do bidirectional power transfer if needed for grid storage or natural disaster scenarios? Yes, via conductive connection, it can stay connected to your vehicle if desired and transfer power. Thank you very much.
We wanted to share this example with you because it shows the direction of the work that we're doing today with ACD group in CharIN, and this focus group is focused on development of automated charging device. Whether it's going to look like an example shown here or a robotic arm plugging into a standard connector, it's something yet to be seen, and I welcome you to participate in this work because, as I said, this is just an expansion of use cases that can be supported by 1511A today. And I think it's a great automation of the charging process is a great example, especially in the post-COVID-19 world for sure. So with that, I would like to wrap up our session today. Thank you all who dialed in. Thank you for your attention, for your participation. Stay tuned. I hope to see you again next Tuesday when we'll be talking about V2G and we'll see some exciting V2G demos. So stay tuned, be involved, get involved, and invite your colleagues and friends to join our online events. Look forward to talking to you next Tuesday. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much.